everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk about a topic I've never really discussed before, which is the use of the Helix. In this case, I'm going to be using Helix Native because it's going to be much easier for the purpose that I'm using it for today. But the use of Helix or Helix Native, HX Stomp, maybe even Pod Go as a processor for things other than guitar, other than just as a guitar modeler or a bass modeler. What we have within the Helix is a suite of really high-end plugins that can be used for a lot of different instruments and even for mixing and possibly even mastering for certain situations. So I wanted to take you through how I might use Helix, and again, in this case, Helix Native, to go through and possibly use it as a studio tool and use some of the really amazing tools that we have at our disposal in there to kind of bring our mixes to life maybe, or to process different instruments in ways that maybe we wouldn't have first thought of, since we usually tend to think of it as, like I said, a guitar amp modeler. So let's go over to Cubase and take a look and see what I have set up. So I thought a lot about how I could do this, and I figured what I would do is I would set up a real simple little rhythm section using all the amazing products from the folks at TuneTrack. I love TuneTrack. I don't think that's a secret. No affiliation with them whatsoever, but I just love what they do. I use Superior Drummer 3, and what I did is I used their SDX Rooms of Hansa with this really cool Hansa vocal booth drum kit. I really love the tones out of this. So I set up a little groove from the Groove library, and I'll just play you that. It sounds like this. These are all completely unprocessed and as they're coming out of the particular VSTI, and I added in an instance of Easy Bass, which is right here, and I grabbed a little loop from that as well, created a little chord progression. And on top of that, I added something from Easy Keys with the same chord progression that the bass line was following. So if we listen to that all together, it sounds something like this. Now, I don't have time to go through and do a proper mix of this, so the end result's not going to be a spectacular mix here. I'm just trying to show you some of the tools that I would use. So what I have here is an instance of Helix Native on each of these tracks, and if you notice, I'll pull up the drum version of it. I have it bypassed. I have 3 blocks working and ready to go. If you notice, they're bypassed. It says 90s metal here. I just didn't rename the preset. I cleared all the blocks, so just ignore that for now. So what I did is I added a retro reel, I added an LA Studio comp, and I added a low and high shelf. Okay, so if we turn this on, unbypass it, I have my blocks bypassed. I'm going to just loop the drums, and I'll show you what I did here. Let's solo out the drums. I'm going to turn this on and off so you can hear the difference in what the sound makes up. But first of all, let's just take a listen without it. So we have the ability with the new Retro Reel block to be able to add some of that beautiful tape saturation. Doesn't have to be a lot, it can be very subtle, but if you listen to how powerful this actually is, I'm gonna remember the settings I have here. 15 inches per second with saturation at 1, texture up at 10, wow and flutter at 0, but watch as I change this up, how much of a dramatic fashion I can change the drum sound to stuff that's really trashed or just really subtle. So take a listen to this. Pretty amazing stuff. If we want that really special effect, trashy drum sound, we could get it from this. But if you notice, I had this with the saturation set at 1, 15 inches per second, and the texture at 10. So if I play it like this and then just even change from 7.5 inches per second to 15 to 30, listen to the hi-hat a lot. I find you can hear a real difference there. Do you notice going down to 7.5 inches per second really darkens things up, but adds a beautiful fatness and glue to it. So these are the settings I settled on there. Then I brought in the LA Studio comp. But if you notice, I'm only getting about a dB and a half of compression out of it, just to give it some of that LA2A fatness too, along with the retro reel. So those two together now sound like this. So when I bypass it and unbypass it, you can really hear the beef that's been added to it. And then I also grabbed a low and high shelf EQ, and I boosted all the frequencies below 100 Hertz by 1 dB, and I boosted all of the frequencies above 6 kilohertz by 2 dB. And let me toggle that in and out as we listen to the loop. So all together with those 3 blocks bypassed, it sounds like this, and I'll toggle back and forth. Very subtle changes, but I found that it just sat nicely and gave it some character and didn't sound so much like maybe a digital instrument did at that point. So I was very happy with that. Now on to the bass guitar. What I did is kind of similar stuff here, and I'll bring up Helix Native here. It's bypassed again. And what I did is I used an LA Studio comp and a retro reel again on this. Saturation of 5 on the retro reel this time. 15 inches per second. I brought the level back a little bit. Texture of 10, wow and flutter on 0. And again, on the LA Studio comp here, I'll turn this off and we'll just listen to the bass. Getting somewhere around 3 dB of gain reduction. Now let's go over to the retro reel and we'll take a listen to what it does. If you notice, I have it adding a little bit of growl to the sound. So now if we listen to the drums and the bass together, and what I will do is I will bypass those inserts as I play through it. And you'll notice up here, it'll go yellow when it's bypassed, right up here where my mouse cursor is. So I was really liking what those were doing to the tones. Now, finally, I went over to the easy keys and I pulled up another instance of Helix Native. And what I did is I used a low and high shelf. I added just a tiny bit of gain, 1 dB above, with all the frequencies above 3 kilohertz. I took a low and high cut though, and I did a low cut on it of 110 hertz just to clean out the bottom end to make room for the bass guitar bit. And I added a little bit of LA Studio comp on that as well. So let me bypass this so we can hear it. And that's what it did to those tones as well. And I just used the compressor to kind of grab and some of those little peaks and tighten them up to sit in the mix better. So those three elements now, I will play in the mix with Helix Native engaged, and then you'll see when I bypass them, this little bypass light will go yellow up here by my cursor. Here's what it sounds like. So there is a bit of a volume jump, and that's never a good thing when comparing tones, but I think you can still hear how it kind of, all those effects that I put in there kind of helped glue everything together into a more cohesive unit. The retro reel, that tape simulation, and whatnot. So that's sounding really nice. One other thing I did though, is I added on the drums through Ascend, I added another instance of Helix Native, and it simply had just a little bit of room reverb. And I wanted to add that just to the whole drum kit so it wasn't quite as dry and gave it a little bit of a sound like it was all sitting in the actual room. Now, if I was doing a proper mix, I may not add it to all the drums like the cymbals and everything, but I'm only adding a touch of it here. I might have just isolated the toms and the snare, maybe the hi-hat, to get that reverb on it. But what that sounded like, and I'll solo the drums here, and we'll turn that on and off. We'll start with it off, and then I will engage that and you can hear what that sounds like. And what that sounded like in the whole mix is this. So I thought it came together kind of nice. And one final thing I did is way over on my mix bus is I took another, and some people might think I'm getting a little crazy, but I'm just showing you what can be done. I'm not necessarily going to use this in every situation, but I took an LA Studio comp, again, put it on very, very subtle, and another retro reel on 30 inches per second, saturation at 0.5. So that was on my mix bus, so all of these different tones were feeding through it. So without that, it sounds like this. This is going to be pretty subtle stuff. And watch again as I toggle in and out. So I thought that was kind of cool when I was getting going. Really loving that retro reel effect. I did my top 5 after the 3.1 update of new features, and that was one of my favorites. I just love the fact that that's added in there along with the LA Studio comp. There's all sorts of other things I could have used. I could have used rotary effects, chorus, vibrato, anything I wanted to, maybe on the keyboards here or whatnot. And the sky's really the limit. So whenever we're thinking of the Helix, we don't want to necessarily just think of it as a guitar processor. We have a really incredible suite of effects we could use. Even if you just have the hardware unit, we can still process tracks through it. Using the Helix as an audio interface and processing tracks through it if we find something we like the sound of. Obviously much easier with Helix Native. We can just add an instance to each particular track we want to. But I was kind of digging the way that came out sounding. Obviously just one example. And to get you guys thinking about the fact that you've got all these great tools that you can use for other purposes and other instruments if you haven't thought that already. I know there's probably a lot of you who already do this type of thing. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I hope that was interesting and helpful to some. I'm gonna have a little fun with this backing track because it was actually sounding kind of cool. Real hats off to the folks at TuneTrack for making such great virtual instruments. You can throw little backing tracks like this together very quickly and effortlessly, and they sound pretty amazing. And then we can take our wonderful processor here in Helix Native or Helix and bring them to life even more. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would want to take a look at it or find it interesting. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. I'm gonna have a little fun with this on my way out.